Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Chip Fridrich. He will talk Vanderbilt baseball. Today's episode brought to you by the Well Coffee House, a Nashville area coffee house that provides fresh roasted coffee along with its house-made pastries, breakfast, and lunch offerings. It has 5 locations to serve you in the Nashville area. Those are Brentwood, Green Hills, Downtown, Bellevue, and the Cool Springs Lifeway. You can find more information at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We also thank our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Today's news presented by Sutherland & Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in any type of accident, give Taylor or Russell a call. That number is 615-846-6200. They can tell you your rights and if they can help you. Vanderbilt wins the baseball series with Tennessee, loses Game 3 but wins the first 2. Commodores now have a Tuesday game with Western Kentucky and will head to Georgia next weekend to play the Bulldogs in Athens. Joining us now, my friend Chip Fridrich. He follows Vanderbilt baseball closely. He was a former pitcher for the Commodores. Chip, hope you're having a great Monday. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Good to talk to you again and follow the Commodores again this season. And looks like we got another year of good things, hopefully down the path, and good weekend with taking 2 out of 3 from the balls, and that's always a good thing. So things are moving along, and we're getting to this, crucial first quarter of the season, so to speak, of how teams stack up, and you start paying attention a little bit to the standings. So it's an exciting time. Hopefully the weather, this little patch of weather we had here, will be the last of the cold weather, and we get into true baseball weather.
Well, let's start with some big picture things first. Let's talk about what Vanderbilt did this weekend. I know that it didn't end the way that they wanted with the 1-run loss to Tennessee on Sunday, but after watching that team and kind of following it from afar, I think that's a pretty good series win for Vanderbilt. I think Tennessee has got its best team in probably at least a dozen years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you said that exactly right, Chris. I mean, UT is vastly improved. It's not your UT team that you've seen over the last decade. They've got some good live arms. They got some speed. They steal a lot of bases. They got some guys in the outfield who can run and go get it. This was as it was mentioned earlier after the games this weekend. Good for both teams RPI wise. I mean, UT's a top 25 team. At least they were before this weekend. So any games in the SEC are going to be battles, and they're going to be, as we can see, you just look at the standings. They're going to be games that could go any way, and you're going to have some teams that are going to fall by the wayside and have some struggles for a weekend or two, and then they're going to be able to right the ship, and then you're going to have others who are going to get lost in it just due to the competition. So UT, taking 2 out of 3 in this day and age of the SEC is nothing to be bemoan about. I know the way that Tim Corbin and his staff think and the way they operate. The last game is always the one that they're thinking about the most recent outcome, and losing on Sunday when they had an opportunity to go for the sweep, I know was something he didn't like. But anytime if you take 2 out of 3 in the SEC every weekend, you'd end up 22-11, and that puts you probably as a national seed in a top 10 team, and you're hosting all the way through if you can make it through. So you keep taking 2 out of 3, and that's what you do. I mean, you're going to get a sweep here and there. You just can't get swept, and that's what UT avoided. It was interesting seeing the post-game comments of the two staffs, and I think UT was thrilled. I don't know if they're thrilled about the outcome, just to go home with a victory, and that's kind of a change in the way it's been in the past. When you have a UT team that was not doing well and getting swept a lot, so a little different attitudes by the two teams and the staffs. But UT, they've got some home games coming up the next couple of weeks. They got Mississippi State this weekend, so they're going to try to look at it as a positive on their end to get things going. But definitely not the way they wanted the Game 3 to go. But again, 2 out of 3 is you win the series, you win all tiebreakers. So it's something that I think nothing that's catastrophic as far as just taking 2 out of 3. It was a good weekend overall.
Well, and you mentioned if you take 2 of 3 every weekend, you end up 20-10, and that would easily be good enough to get a national seed. And I think that's kind of the direction where they're headed. RPI this morning is 3, strength of schedule is 4. Tennessee is 7 in the RPI. I know people pay attention to the polls, but that's really the one that matters. Now, the Vols are going to have to get some more wins because if you finish, say, 11-19, maybe 12-18, you're not going to get in the NCAAs. Probably 13-17 in the league is where the discussion might start. And I think 14-16 with what they've done would be good enough. But point is, those are the numbers that matter. Chip, we're now halfway through the season, and this is kind of where the point where you start watching what have they accumulated. They've got 3 top 25 wins with plenty more opportunities coming. That's in terms of the RPI. And Vanderbilt's 10 wins in the top 50. Now, some of those may fall out, but some other teams that they played may jump up inside the top 50. And that's really what you watch for this time of the season. We can start giving those things a whole lot more credence once we get to the midway point, and they are in fantastic shape right now. I don't think they'd be any worse than the 3rd or 4th national seed if the season ended today.
Yeah, you're right. And this is when you're exactly right. The RPI watching starts, and you pay attention a little bit to the standings and looking at those and seeing who's struggling a little bit and who's not. I think the glaring thing when you look at things that don't make sense is the fact Kentucky's at the bottom at 1-8 in the conference. They've really struggled, and that's not something I think that anybody thought, along with South Carolina being 2-7 on as far as the eastern side. So it is. This is when you start paying attention to it, and this weekend, of course, a huge test with Georgia coming up. They're sitting there. You know, Georgia has been not down of late the last couple of years, but they hadn't been the Georgia program that's, you know, built up so much steam for years down there and rolled out some very good baseball teams. And they're sitting there at the top of the standings with 7-2 mark and, you know, 23 games overall, and Vanderbilt coming in there. So it's going to be an interesting series how that comes out. But, you know, these RPIs can fluctuate. Of course, Vanderbilt benefits of having a team like back-to-back weekends where they're going to benefit on the RPI side.
Well, and one other thing, I think all the SEC teams are in the top 70 of the RPI, and I think most of the midweek games, I think Western is in the 170s, MTSU may be somewhere in that range, a little lower, so not a lot of potential RPI bad losses coming up, which is another thing that can kind of derail you a little bit every now and then. But let's talk about the weekend. Let's start with the one thing, and it's the negative, and there's a lot of positives. I don't mean to start it on a negative note, but the one thing a lot of people were talking about was the play to send Walker Crisanti from first to score on Julian Infante's double. That run scores, the game is tied, and Vanderbilt still got a chance to go ahead. I didn't have much fault with the decision to send the runner, but running Crisanti instead of maybe Campbell Fentress was kind of the thing that people talked about. What was your take on that whole situation?
You know, Tim Corbin's always going to be a coach, and he's said this, and I've heard him say this through the years, and I know it drives some Vanderbilt fans crazy, his aggressiveness on the base paths. And I don't know if there's ever been a stat, if you've ever kept up with or heard it from media relations, of how many guys, I know it's not something they like to keep up with, of players getting thrown out at third base and at home. But there's a lot. It's an obvious point that Vanderbilt gets a lot of players thrown out the plate, and it's because of that aggressiveness. And some would argue that maybe in high school level or, you know, your amateur level before college, that you're really trying. A lot of things have to happen when a ball gets hit to the corner like that. The relay has to be perfect. You can't bobble the ball. You know, you got to have some speed on the base path. Those things, again, in the high school level, you can get away with being super aggressive on that because several things have to happen perfectly for the runner to get thrown out the plate or at third or taking an extra base. In the college level, and especially in the SEC, you're talking about, you know, class athletes who've done this before, and it's drilled. And you know, in that case, you know, Joe Fisher, I was not at the game when it happened, but Joe's comment on the radio was, well, you just had to send him. You just had to send him the way the game was going. But from what I'm told and watching some video of what happened, the Grisanti was not 8 to 10 feet around third when the relay was caught. So that's, I think, the problem that many people had was it was an over-aggressive. Sometimes when you got it, Chris, you got it. You know that it's going to be a bang-bang plate to plate. But that wasn't even close. And there's question as far as being overly aggressive in that situation. It was late in the game. You're going for the knockout punch or to tie it. But yeah, but Tim is the type of guy who's not going to change, and he hasn't changed that. He's always pushed the envelope on base running. And sometimes when it's when things don't happen your way and you get runners thrown out, it's frustrating for Vanderbilt fans. But I really don't see, him changing his attitude as far as that's concerned. But it was, I know you were there, and again, I've seen the video, but even the outfielder pulled the baseball, and still it wasn't even close on the relay. So I know there was some gnashing of teeth going on about that, because it was a play that you sit there and say, well, you got guys behind him, especially with this lineup that's pretty potent, more potent than they've had in recent past, that someone could have driven the runner in. But that's just the way he operates. It's the way the staff, they push it. They are aggressive on the base pass. You've seen him do things like, run a guy from second on a bunt when there's a throw to first, and he continues the runner coming from second, kind of like a merry-go-round deal where super pushing the envelope there as far as trying to get the extra run. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon.
Well, I actually was not there for the Sunday game. I was there for the other two. I guess one thing worth bringing up, Infante hit in the 9-hole. So I guess you flip the lineup over again and go back to Cooper Davis. The question is, at that point, are you better off? Of course, you also need another run to win the game, too. So there's also that. In other words, what are your chances of getting the run in, sending him there, compared to taking the next at bat? Now, Cooper Davis hit pretty well over the weekend, but you also had a pitcher on the mound who's got pretty good control and was dealing. So I don't know how much that factored in, but it is, I guess, something to consider.
Yeah, and I mean, I like, hindsight's 20/20, as they say. You're looking back, Cooper Davis at the top of the order coming up. I like my chances there, but what they were going up against, I think it's what Crochet was throwing so well that I guess in Joe Fisher's comment that they had to send him, and they weren't. I mean, he had struck out 4 in his 4 1/3 inning that Crochet had pitched yesterday. But it's just a gut feel you have to have, and I'm not going to argue. Tim does a great job of getting up the line when he's coaching third base and being able to see that, and that's just a talent in itself. Being a third base coach is knowing when to send runners and when to gamble. It was just pretty blatant. I've seen us get guys thrown out at third base and home quite frequently, but I have not seen it be that blatant as far as just, it was almost like the catcher was waiting there. It wasn't a bang bang play at home. So looking back on it, I'm sure Tim, he's been doing this long enough. Looking back on it, it was a little over aggressive, and especially knowing what's behind him with Cooper Davis at the top of the order. So it's one of those plays in college baseball that I think at the major league level, there would have been less a chance of sending him just because of the arms that you have at that level of making the relay.
Yeah, and again, you had a much better view of it than I did. But let's move on. Let's talk about the lineup. Man, these guys just continued to hit. Vanderbilt is second in the SEC in runs scored, I think both in league games and overall. And in league games, they've faced 3 really good pitching staffs right now. In Florida, Texas A&M, and Tennessee, I think this is the best lineup he's ever had. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it harkens back to the Cesar Nicholas. Is that those days when back, and I'm going back, good. How far am I going back here with those guys?
That would have been about 04. I think this lineup is a lot better than that one because that had some holes in it. This one, to me, just heck, not just 1-9, but also if you consider bats off the bench and Jason Gonzalez, who's really hitting well. I don't think it's been talked about a lot. And of course, Pat DeMarco hasn't played in 2 weeks. I just think this is the best hitting talent he's ever had.
Yeah, and the thing that strikes me about this team in the lineup is how aggressive they are, not swinging at bad pitches like some teams have in the past. And you look at just the way the ball comes off the bat for most of these guys. They hit the ball hard, and that's what harkens me back to that team in the mid 2000s. It was just they were balls hitting off the fence, and the way the ball was coming off the bat with the bat speed. That's what a friend of mine, a former player, we were comparing that team, because that team was very aggressive, and just the power numbers of, you're talking about home runs, you're talking about how they're getting the bat through the zone and hitting the ball in gaps. You look at the averages with, Austin Martin. I failed to realize he even played. Friday night I'm looking around and I thought to myself, where's Austin Martin? And he's 446. And I just forgot that he wasn't even playing. So, one of the top hitters in the conference. So, you got a lot of big numbers as far as batting averages, guys hitting in the 300s. And as you mentioned, DeMarco hadn't played in a while, and Gonzalez is hitting 375. Infante looks like he's making a move. You're talking about some imposing, and this is coming from a former pitcher. I wouldn't want to face those guys. Imposing figures in the batter's box, guys who have a lot of discipline, not swinging at bad pitches. And, JJ Bleday, to me, looks like a guy who could hit a home run every time he's up. It's big, strong kid, and there's no wonder why. I was sitting with a scout in front of a scout where at my seats on Friday night, and he was just, drooling over the prospects of JJ Bleday as a professional. And he looks like a pro. We got guys who are very intimidating in the box, good power, good bodies, and can feel like that they can jump out of the park at any time.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing on Bleday. It does seem like he's going to hit a home run almost every time up. But the lineup, Mike Baxter got criticized a good bit last year in his first year as a hitting coach. I am just super impressed with the work that he and David Macias have done. And it's not just the guys like Bleday and everybody else in the lineup, and Ethan Paul's had a phenomenal year, and we could go on and on there. But I look at what he's done with Julian Infante, who he and Jason Gonzalez, both those two, they're laying off like the breaking stuff away that they used to just get destroyed on last year. They're not swinging at bad pitches. With Julian, it's been a thing where it's almost been like baby steps. He's making better contact. And earlier in the year, he was just kind of topping infield grounders, and he was not striking out, which was a step, but it wasn't driving it. Now you've seen him drive the ball. He had 2 home runs this week. The one against Tennessee this weekend was a real shot. He's hit some doubles. He's hit some hard singles. You're starting to see the Infante that you saw 2 years ago. And Gonzalez, again, does not get enough recognition because he's not playing every day. But I just look at his approach at the plate and how much more he walks. That kid's turned into a pretty good hitter. There are going to be a lot of strikeouts. But I think that if you want to say, look at what Baxter's done, you can talk about the lineup. But I think his best work may be with those 2 kids.
Right, and it's a lot of it's upstairs with those kids too in the head, and it's psychological, and you can just see that Infante and Gonzalez, by their body language, are much more confident when they come up to the plate. Now, as you mentioned, the praise with Baxter and Macias, they deserve all the credit there, because you can tell they've taken these kids and broken down their swing, even in the fact that Infante has definitely changed his stance. His feet are a lot closer together, a little more compact swing. His hands are down slightly, but definitely more compact swing in Infante. And Gonzalez is too. His at bat discipline is so much better than it was last year. A lot of this is cage work that no one sees. It's the sessions in the fall where they've been working with these kids and breaking down their swing and getting them confidence. Because anybody who plays baseball knows it's confidence is how you feel in the box and how you prepare, and discipline as far as selecting pitches to hit is 70% of the game. There's no question that these guys have the physical talent. I mean, Infante will get drafted alone this year just in the fact that someone feels like they can take him and build him into a big league baseball player. And it's just a matter of giving those guys the confidence to feel like that they can get the job done at the plate. And baseball's a streaky game, and we all know that it can go weeks where you can have the at-bats of your lives, and then you can be in a slump, and it's just like that, a snap of the fingers. So lots of kudos go out to those two coaches, as you mentioned, Mike Baxter being the primary hitting coach, as far as taking these guys from where they were last year, striking out a lot, not having any discipline at all, and getting kind of down in the dumps. You tell by their body language, much more confident this year when they're at the plate.
Well, speaking of confidence, the bullpen looked a lot more confident. They were dominant this weekend, Chip. I think allowed 2 hits in 11 or 12 innings, struck out 16, walked just 2, which was huge. I think that if Vanderbilt had ended up sweeping, that might be the thing everybody would be talking about this morning.
Right. I mean, Eder and Brown yesterday were phenomenal. I mean, they shut the door after Rocker gave up his 7 runs, and 6 of those being earned. I mean, Jake Eder was magnificent through 4 1/3, and then Tyler Brown behind him. I was really glad to see the Zach King a lot was said in the post game about his effort on Friday night. Even though he threw an inning, he struck out the side, and it was good to see him along with Tyler Brown, who came in and struck out 2 in his 2 innings. But Zach King's going to be one of those guys who could definitely, confidence-wise, needs to get going, and I hope this is a start for him because, I mean, he's got a big league body. The guy's tall. He was throwing the ball harder than I've seen him on Friday night than he's thrown in the past. He was mid-90s, 94, 95, looked very confident, even though he started off with a 3-0 count, came back to strike out the side. But King is going to be someone they're going to need down the road, and whether the SEC tournament or in a regional, where you can get sideways in a series, in a regional, in a bracket, and you need a starter. I feel like this staff has those guys, those extra guys who could step up with Eder and King and be a starter, along with, we hadn't even scratched the surface what could happen with the rest of the bullpen. Those guys are important in a regional when it can go wrong for you and you need someone to go 5, 6, 7 innings. And I think they're getting that more than they've had the last couple of years. And it was impressive to see the bullpen do their job this weekend. Great job by them. Like you said, Friday and Saturday night, Friday and Saturday afternoon, took care of things and got the victories.
Okay, let's talk about a couple of roles. I want to start with what Vanderbilt needs to do in the third starter role, the Sunday starter role, and also midweek. Now, my idea has been, I think that you maybe flip Mason Hickman, who's been brilliant in weekdays and has SEC starting experience, and Kumar Rocker, who is kind of getting a baptism by fire. But there's one variable that I don't know has been brought up yet. Vanderbilt goes to Georgia next weekend, and you have the dynamic of Kumar Rocker pitching where he went to high school. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, and maybe if you're Tim Corbin, that's one that under any other circumstance you don't make that move yet. Maybe you do make that move because there's a lot of pressure, but maybe you don't deny a kid an opportunity to pitch in front of people he knows if that's something important to him. So I think that's really two discussions. What do you do with that spot long term, and how do you handle it this weekend with that?
I don't think you do it this weekend, Chris. And you and I were thinking the same thing. I thought about that last night. If you take the ball out of his hands this Sunday, I think it turns into a situation where mentally you're going to potentially fry him and get him going, start thinking too much. He's going home, like you mentioned. It's a huge game, I'm sure, that he's had circled. You've already taken the top off the bottle on him, okay? I mean, he started the first series against TCU did not have a great outing. You made the decision early, right, wrong, or indifferent. You made the decision to have him be a starter. And I'm not saying you can't do it eventually. I'm not saying you can do it after this weekend. I think if you run the risk, though, of doing it this weekend, and you really, if you think about it, you can't do it this weekend. Okay, he can't throw tomorrow night. He's already thrown. He threw this weekend. So if you're going to make the switch, if anything, you would hold. You would get in a situation where you would put Hickman in the Sunday role, but then Rocker would have to be kind of a mid-relief guy on the weekend. So you'd have to start someone else tomorrow night. I don't think you're going to see it happen this weekend. I thought back on David Price's first start. Okay. His first start was a game I was able to do on television. I'll never forget it. It was his first SEC start, and it was against Alabama at home. The team was struggling, and it was late March. It was about the second or third series of the season. The team had come off a bad weekend series, and Corbin just said, we got to just go with it. He'd been pitching well during the week and coming in some spot relief. And when you make a decision like that, you got to go with it. It's a gut feeling with the pitching staff and the pitching coach and you. And that's what they did with David Price. But they did not do that before that. I mean, Price, again, they waited a series or two. With Rocker, they made the decision they were going to do it, and they did it. And I'm not saying it's something that, again, that cannot change in weekend 5 or 6. But Rocker is a special talent. The first time I saw him, the ball just comes out of his hand, I notice, a lot differently than it does other pitchers. He's very poised, but things just haven't gone particularly his way like they did, if you can compare to David Price, who was, similar, raw talent to those guys. But they just made the decision a little later. That was something they made years ago with Price, and they handled Rocker a little differently. So to summarize, I don't think you do it this weekend. I think it's too fragile with just the emotion of going home. I'm not saying you don't do it down the line, but Rocker is going to be a vital member of the staff, just like Hickman is going to be, as we talked about Zach King. You got a Zach King, you got a Hickman, you got Eater, guys who can be starters in games and regionals and super regionals if you need it. But I don't think that you see them do it this weekend. Hickman's pitching well. Vanderbilt's always had a history of guys that midweek guy, and you can harken back to the days of this, having 9 and 10-0 records, 9-0, 10-0, because they're getting those wins during the week. But that's a vital role. And Tim, I think, was very short. I don't know if it was you, Chris, who asked the question, but someone asked him after the game of the video interview if he was thinking about switching Hickman and Rocker, and he gave a quick no. His answer was Tuesday and Wednesday games are important, just as important to get wins in that slot. So I don't think you're going to see it. I'm not sure what you think, but my logic says it can't be this weekend, especially with Rocker having just pitched yesterday. I think you'd have to make it 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, fortunately, I was not the one who asked that question, but the more I think through it, I think that's absolutely the right call. I think you risk a whole lot more harm done on a number of levels. Now, like you said, down the line, if it's not working out, maybe. But there's also the fact that with Mason, it is working in the midweek. And Tim, when he finds a rhythm with something, he does not like to go away from it.
No, he's a creature of habit, definitely. And Hickman striking out. I think he struck out 12 against Lipscomb the other night. He's having some success. So those wins, he's right. I mean, those wins are as important, but, a notch above, of course, are SEC, victories that you put out there to improve your status and your RPI. So I think you see the same rotation this weekend. And I think after that, you can get almost closer to the halfway point. There's still a lot of baseball to be played, and you can see how it goes.
Yeah, and of course, for people who didn't follow it, Mason Hickman was also brilliant against Belmont. But, Chip, I want to talk about some parts in the lineup. There's a lot of variables right now because you've got Pat DeMarco has been out for 2 weeks with what I think is a leg injury. So we don't know when he's coming back. In the meantime, you've got Austin Martin came back and started at third, which, frankly, he's not been very good at third lately, although you can't take the bat out. Jason Gonzalez has some defensive issues, but boy, the bat on any other team, he'd be a no-brainer in the lineup on this one when everybody's sporting those on-base percentages north of 400 and slugging 500 or close to it. He just kind of blends in, but he's been pretty special in his own right. Let's start with that. What do you do at third base right now?
Well, that's tough because I agree with everything you said. I mean, where do you got some guys who are doing really well. I mean, Gonzalez had a good weekend. He had a good play at third base. You know, he was saved the day there on the play going to his right. Got the out with Infante coming off the bag, and then had a key hit down the right field line. It's a touchy situation because you got one of the conference's leading hitters and the leading hitter on the team with Austin Martin, but he doesn't look that comfortable at third base, and he's kind of a guy who, I mean, Tim said earlier in the year, you have two of his infielders with Ray and Martin were their two best outfielders last year. And they're playing on the infield with Martin and Ray. So, Ray's looking really good at second base. He's looking comfortable. So it becomes a point where you're running out of room to place people. And it's just almost of who's hitting in the moment. It's a good problem to have because it means that you have some guys being productive in the batter's box and also in the field. But it's a touchy situation because, right, I mean, in the situation on Friday and Saturday, you had you really didn't miss Austin Martin all that much. The victories could have been a little more as far as distance, more numbers on the offensive side. But in a way, it's a good problem to have. But you want to have your guys get enough reps, and platooning is something that I think he would rather have. And Corbin has mentioned several times he'd like to have his lineup set, especially when you're getting into weekends, 3, 4, 5 in the SEC race. So I really don't have an answer for you. I know that Austin Martin has to play somewhere, hitting that well as he is, and I think you'll probably continue to see him at third base unless anything changes drastically where just fielding wise he can't handle it. And then it becomes, what do you do with him? Certainly Cooper Davis is doing great in center field. You're not going to move Blade and right. Steven Scott is doing well in left field. It's where would you put him? That's the problem. And it's, again, a good problem to have, but you want to have some consistency going down the stretch.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. The easy answer might be, you move Gonzalez to DH. Well, okay, you got Ty Duvall there, who we've been saying for 3 years hasn't played enough. He started the season slowly. Well, now he's hitting more like the Ty Duvall that we have been used to seeing. So you bump him for the lineup. And by the way, the kid hit an opposite field home run, which is, I guess, would indicate a little growth in him too as a hitter. I guess you could say, well, Gonzalez is a right-hander, Duvall's a lefty. You've got a platoon at DH. But having said that, they've got some pretty advanced stuff in terms of TrackMan and analytics and in terms of knowing who hits what pitch and what kind of pitcher. I don't know for them if it's as simple as a lefty-righty platoon at DH, even if they thought that was the answer.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. They're going to play the averages, and it's you have a point about Duvall, being in that slot, but it seems like whenever what's happened in the last couple of weeks is someone's gone out with an injury, especially in the Austin Martin, and it's next man up mentality, and someone steps in and does a great job. It's not like there's a huge drop off that we've seen, and that's when you have a veteran team with this many seniors that have come back, and that leadership that's there, that there hasn't been any fall off whatsoever. And when you can take, most teams, when you take a batter at the upper fours overall and take him out of the lineup, you can see a huge drop off, and there wasn't that Friday and Saturday night when Vanderbilt got the 2 victories. So it will, things tend to work out, and the DH could be a spot. A couple weeks ago, I was thinking to myself, well, do you move Martin back to the outfield? Because it looks like, in Harrison Ray's kind of being comfortable at second. I think Martin's a guy you need to have out there. I think he's got that, feisty attitude that's contagious, and he's aggressive, and a guy that I think Corbin wants out in the playing field somewhere. And, but, it just goes to show you, I mean, Harrison Ray was not playing, was not getting the reps earlier in the year, and now he's pretty much solidified himself at second base and for the time being. So it's that next man up mentality that has worked. It's Corbin's philosophy of these positions are not owned, they're rented, and whoever's the hot bat and the hot fielder, they're going to get the reps in the lineup.
Well, and they've also got Dominic Keegan, who started to get some pinch hit DH at bats, and although they like his bat, so that's another one. Walker Crisanti has hit well at times, so it's a problem they've never had. They've never had this many bats, and you made a great point with all the injuries. That has allowed them to pick up the slack. I mean, a lot of years, the drop-off from what they had in the lineup to what they had on the bench would have been massive. I think with this team, the beat just goes on, and that's why they have not suffered any kind of a losing streak, even with some significant injuries. Now, one more thing before we move on to the mailbag. Well, two more things. First of all, I really don't get it with Austin Martin. The great bat, he came in as a shortstop, which you think if a kid can play shortstop, plus the fact he played 6 positions last year, that he's going to be an asset in the field. He's really struggled at third. He struggled at second. I don't know if it's a case that he's not getting enough reps at one spot, maybe. I don't understand why Austin has struggled in the field as much as he has, because I've never heard issues with his attitude or his work ethic. He's very athletic. Maybe it's just a thing where as he gets more time in a certain spot, he gets better. But I look at him and I don't understand why he has struggled in the field as much as he has, Chip.
Yeah, he picked up his 4th error yesterday in that game and of the season, not 4 in the game, but 4th of the season. So he hasn't found a home yet. And guys like that, if they haven't found a home in the field, the way they stay in the lineup is with their bat, of course, in which he's done. You would think of if he played in the outfield last year, but again, where are you going to put him? Whose spot is he going to take? The DH spot, like you mentioned, might be his home eventually. But it's the one that's a head scratcher. If anything has been a head scratcher this year, it's been that, because he made the move to the infield this year. The first couple games that I saw, he looked fine, and then he had a drop off and didn't look that comfortable. I think they've tried him, like you said, 6 different positions. And it's just a matter of finding your home. On the flip side of that, eventually with his pro prospects, that being able to play multiple positions is a positive. On the other side of it, if a scout sees you or an organization sees you without a home and without a permanent position, they wonder what your limitations are. So I would say that's been a big head scratcher this year is where his eventual home's going to be in the field. And but he's got some time to figure it out, and the staff's got some time to work through it. And whether it's reps or, he's been banged up a little bit, and he had the series when he did not play, and that wasn't a good thing when he missed three games and due to a team violation or team matter, whatever, private matter, whatever you call it. So we'll have to monitor that the next couple of weeks and see if he can find a home. But I don't think it's anything that's ultimately pressing to hit the panic button on him. But he's got to find his way, and hopefully he will in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, last question from me before I get to a couple from the mailbag. What do you do in center when Pat DeMarco gets healthy? That's presuming he gets healthy. I don't know any reason that he won't. I would presume that he goes back to center, because I think if they start the season with him in center and Cooper Davis in left, that means they think he's the better option in center. But there's going to be reverberations when he gets healthy too.
Yeah, I think you'd have to take him back to center. I think he's anchored that outfield earlier in the season, and depending on what his injury is, to see how soon he comes back. But I think that's what you would have to do. And these next couple weeks are going to be with him, his getting back. We're going to see some shuffling around, but I know that Tim's, as we mentioned, but I've mentioned many times before, is a man a coach who likes consistency and routine and getting that consistent lineup. We're still not there yet. I mean, we're talking, you got Georgia coming up, and you got, as you reach the mid part of the year, I think that you'll hopefully with DeMarco coming back soon. What is it specific? Is that back or lat. I mean, that seems like his injury, DeMarco.
I'm not sure. For some reason, I thought it was a leg, but I might be wrong about that. Of course, they do not comment really on injuries that much, so who knows?
Right. Well, it's a good problem to have. I'd rather have that problem than when we had, the last couple of years we've had some injuries and you've seen a real fall off as far as production. It's as a coach, as much as you want the consistency, when you have people stepping up, it helps you sleep at night, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, it really is a crazy situation. I don't know. I would question whether there's another team in the country that has this kind of quote-unquote problem. But let's move on to the mailbag. That is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan Josh Minton, an independent insurance agent operating out of Brentwood. If you're looking for a one-stop shop to take care of your insurance needs, Josh has got you covered. Call him today. That number, 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Twitter at Joshua Minton HQ or Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my insurance agent. Give him a try and tell him you heard about it here. This one from Ann Arbor. When warming up, does the pitcher have a good idea of whether or not he's able to command his pitches? If he knows he's off, what can he do about it?
Well, that's a good question. There are days when you got it and days that you don't. I know that a lot of it is when you're warming up in the bullpen, there's factors as far as wind. I know it was very windy this weekend, and with the winds blowing in your face, especially where our park is, Hawkins Field is situated, you can get a pretty good feel as far as how things are going. The wind's blowing out into your face. It can make your fastball flatten quite a bit. And usually after, I would say, 15, 20 pitches as a pitcher, kind of what you have and what you don't. But this weekend, when the weather's cold, this past weekend it was pretty warm on Friday and Saturday night, pleasant conditions, and then Sunday it gets cold, very windy, and a lot of people don't realize that stadium with the football facade in the left field, for years it's almost creates a natural tunnel for the wind. If the wind's blowing in a certain direction, it can definitely make the ball, of course, travel towards left field, almost like a vacuum. Especially the old park was worse than it is now, but still, that football stadium that's on the left field line definitely plays a part in it. But as far as pitching, and it can play a part in it too, as far as the winds and if it's blowing in your face or not. But as far as having a feel, you pretty much know when you get in the bullpen certain days that you have it and you don't. And when you don't have it, you almost has to be a situation where you're working on location, mixing up your pitches if you don't have the velocity on a certain day.
Okay, well, that begs some interesting questions because let's say you're throwing in the bullpen and you don't have it. If you tell the coach you don't want to come in, that makes you look kind of bad, like you don't want to compete, even though you might be trying to help the team. I do not ever see the bullpen from where we are in the stands. We cannot see even an inch of it. I would suppose they've got obviously somebody down there watching to kind of do that job for the coaching staff. Who's in charge of watching the bullpen sessions?
Well, I would think Brownie. I mean, they definitely have staff down there, especially in a tense situation where they're trying to decide between two guys. That's why many times you will see not only if they're playing a situation with a left-handed pitcher and a right-handed pitcher throwing due to a situation if they're going to face a particular batter and they can have their choice. But if there's definitely a member of the coaching staff who's down there, it can tell if a certain pitcher has pop on his ball, then more so or more velocity. You're never going to say. I mean, I never told a coach that I didn't have it. I mean, you don't. There's so few opportunities with this pitching staff with the competition that they have that if you're given an opportunity to warm up, you're going to try to go in there and give it your all. Now, I'm sure if you're injured, that's one thing. If your velocity is way off, but I dare say you would see many people on this staff who are going to say, Coach, I don't have it. I don't have it today. They know from their workouts during the week, and they pretty much have a system in the locker room when they go in that day. They know who the starter is, who the candidates are for mid-relief and who's going to be in at the end of the game. That's sort of predetermined. Now, it's all hands on deck pretty much on Sunday, because that becomes a staff day where you might just piece together a win, try to piece together a win with as many people. You see that happen a lot in the SEC on Game 3 on Sundays. But they know pretty much who's going to be mentally, you're going to have a shot to be in the game if your number's called, if it's warranted. And those guys, a lot of people don't know that, but it's pretty much predetermined based on the situation. There's a right outside the locker room, inside the locker room before they go out on the field. There's a chart that shows who's in line to go, almost the order of who would go. So they're getting ready throughout the game.
Okay, 2 questions from Topsman97 to end the podcast. He says, I've been a Vanderbilt football and basketball fan since 1981, but did not follow the baseball program until 2004 or maybe 2003. I have plenty of football and basketball memories going back to the early 80s, but I can't say that about baseball. Having said that, how does SEC baseball, when you played in the conference, compare to now? In your opinion, what's the biggest difference between the two eras? Who had the best facilities back then and the best teams in the league? Now, you played late 80s, early 90s for context, so with that, I'll throw it to you.
Well, and I had the privilege of being Willie Donick and I did the games on radio right when this gentleman was saying, in that era of 2004 to 2008. Willie Donick and I did the games, and we did a lot of television games too. So in a sense, when the conference really changed a lot facility-wise during that era. I mean, it changed tremendously. From the difference, there's 2 differences I'll give you as far as when the modern era of where we are now to compare to when I played, and really, and it started changing mid-90s to around 2000. Number 1 was the pitching velocity, no doubt. When I played, you had Ben McDonald, you had Carpenter at Georgia, you had Greg Olson at Auburn, Russ Springer at LSU, and Bird at LSU. They were throwing in the low 90s. They were throwing 92, 93, and that was it. You didn't have anybody throwing, and those are just guys from memory, because those are some pretty good arms, by the way, that I just mentioned, especially McDonald. But
And let me interrupt you. The other 2 were big leaguers too, Paul Bird and Russ Springer. So yeah, those were pretty good arms.
But velocity-wise, you when you saw those guys, you're like, those guys have got some giddy up on the fastball. They're 92, 93, and that was like, whoa. You mainly saw mid-80s. We'd had some guys on our staff who threw 87, 88. That was it. If you saw a guy throw in the 90s, it was an event, and you knew who those guys were. Today, it's abnormal to have a team that does not have players who throw in the low 90s. And we saw on Friday night, which I of course made an idiot of myself. When the pitcher from UT, the sophomore, hit 102 on the gun, I barked out to my 2 sons. I said, well, the gun must be broken. There's no way he's throwing 102. And the scout tapped me on the shoulder and said, yes, sir, he is throwing 102. And that just amazed me. I've kept watching. He was 99, he was 100, and that kid's got a future. The scout said he was throwing 83, 84 when he was in high school his senior year. And then whatever happened, and he's now throwing what he's a sophomore at UT, throwing 99, 100, 101 consistently. So that has been, it's abnormal to look on the gun on the scoreboard at Hawkins Field and not see somebody throwing the 90s. So that's number 1. Number 2 would probably be the sheer strength of the players, the bat speeds. Of course, the bats were different back then. We had a little discrepancy as far as the composition of the bats. So back in my day, you saw a lot of balls that would be home, and balls were crushed, and they were lighter, and the ratio of length to weight was very there's a huge discrepancy. So you had guys up there swinging toothpicks, and so you had a lot more activity at the plate, and they dulled that down a little bit. But the players who play the game year round and the strength of those players and how they specialize in sports. That's another thing that has been a huge difference between my era, in the after, and then it kind of starting the last 10 years. Facility wise, when you ask about facilities, you've got these stadiums that it's really hard. Sometimes friends and I will say, name them 1 through 14, who's got the best and who's got the worst. And when you get down the list, you're like, how can that field be the worst and be number 8? It's a beautiful park. Everyone's one-upping each other. Florida's getting ready to build a new field. It'll be online in a year or two. You've got Arkansas's field, which is great. LSU's, of course, is getting 13,000 people at a game. So facilities definitely have jumped off the page, and a huge difference. You got people in Ole Miss who come to the games on the weekend. Oxford's a wonderful city. It's a beautiful city, but now they've turned that into, in Oxford, a destination for the weekends when they play at home, and they get 10, 11,000 people. So back probably when he first started watching it in the 2000s, that was making the transition. But now you're just seeing this one-upsmanship. Kentucky's got a beautiful facility now, brand new, and you're seeing that by everybody. So I would say, again, pitching speed, the athletic prowess of these kids, specializing, being number 2, and then asking about facilities, wrapping it up. You're just seeing it's going to continue to get more and more. These stadiums are becoming destination things as college baseball, places to go for their fan bases to go spend the weekend, and that's been a huge difference too.
Last question from Topsman 97. The SEC is arguably the best baseball conference in the nation now, but I don't think that was true in the 80s and 90s, maybe even the early 2000s. What do you think caused the league to rise to the top nationally?
I would beg to differ a little bit, because LSU was great in the late 80s and early 90s. LSU was the class of the league, and it was kind of LSU, Mississippi State. Those two teams were going to Omaha a whole lot. Will Clark was playing, and they were playing on ESPN and Rosenblatt. So those two teams were the class, definitely, of the league, and Florida was good too. But those two, Mississippi State and LSU, had the reputation as far as behind them. But what catapulted, I think, was just the school spending money. Just what I mentioned a minute ago was facilities and being able to recruit these kids and playing in warm weather. I think that has a lot to do with it. But facility wise, and the hitting cages and the pitching labs that these schools have, and the indoor turf and those kind of things, just kids want to play for these schools. So I think that's been the biggest push for the SEC. They spent the money, and if they didn't spend the money, as you saw in Vanderbilt's case, I mean, back when I call it affectionately a sandbox that I played in. I mean, it was there were high school fields better than that. In the previous administration, when I was there, the Roy Kramer, when he was the athletic director, just baseball was not on the radar. And when it became a priority, and Mewburn was there, who was my coach, the last year or two he was there, they got the stadium built, and the excitement level just rose, and you saw what that happened. And when Tim Corbin took it over, the rest is history. So, in answer to his question, the SEC's always been strong, top to bottom. Now I think it's better than it's ever been, and that's where it's cut. It was still a little top heavy back when he was talking about in the 80s, but what's caused it is the fact these schools have spent the money, they've gone out and got great coaches, great coaching staffs, and they're able to get these kids who, in lieu of being drafted and taking the money, they are saying, and especially get a great education at a school like Vanderbilt. But these other places are saying, I can play a AA level ball almost and get an education paid for by going to school rather than going the draft route.
Chip, that was outstanding. Thanks for joining us today. I know you've got a busy real estate business that you have taken some time away from today to do the podcast. Tell people about that.
Sure, Chris. Frederick and Clark Realty is our company. My brother and I are the owners of that. It's family owned since 1960. And we have two offices, one in Brentwood in the Maryland Farms area and one here in the Green Hills area where I'm located now. 150 agents, all stellar agents, very proud of them, a lot of them with Vanderbilt ties. the ownership group, the Whit Clark, a Vanderbilt graduate, the Clark of Frederick and Clark, and my brother Steve went to Vanderbilt, and myself. So lots of Vanderbilt ties here. We're full-time agents here. We're not the type of real estate firm that employs hundreds and hundreds of agents that might sell 2 or 3 homes a year, and that is a good thing because you're getting professional agents who work at it. It's their livelihood. They know the market. We are still in a somewhat of a seller's market. I think the last time we did the podcast a year ago, it was definitely a full-blown seller's market. Things have quieted down a little bit, but still somewhat a seller's market. Pricing has dropped slightly. And if you are someone listening to the podcast who are interested in buying a house or selling, it's a good time to do so. The spring market is already here. In the real estate business, we call the spring market. It really starts in around February. And things are popping. We've got a lot of listings. We've got a lot of agents who are great on the buyer's rep side who can help you if you're finding a home. And we can walk you through all the steps as far as qualifying for a home, finding a home in the area you want to live in, and going through the inspection process and the negotiation process. So give us a call. You can look us up on the web at frederickandclark.com, and we'd love to help any of our SEC baseball fans, Vanderbilt fans, whoever that would need the assistance of our firm. Again, 2 locations, one in Brentwood, one here in Green Hills, and we kind of span the entire Middle Tennessee area, and we'd love to help out any of your listeners.
Hey, Chip, thanks so much for joining us, and let's do this next week.
We'll talk to you soon, Chris.
All right, he's Chip Fridrich, former Vanderbilt baseball pitcher and baseball insider. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll do this again with more episodes coming later in the week.